Welcome to KYNDversations, a space for sacred dialogue, honest reflection, and deep listening. I'm your host, KYNDversations. KYNDversations was born from my own inner dialogue, my journey of spirituality through life's unfoldings, questions, and becoming. Along the way, I discovered something essential, that transformation often happens not in isolation, but in conversation. In this podcast, I sit with people from diverse faith traditions, spiritual paths, and lived experiences to explore one central question. What does devotion mean to you? And how does your relationship to the sacred shape your life? My hope is that each conversation becomes a light post for those who feel challenged, disconnected, or searching for belonging. And that through our shared reflection, you might find courage, clarity, and deeper connection to yourself. Wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome here. Greetings. Welcome to KYNDversations. I am your host, Kendra, and it's such a gift to be present with you. I am through the moon about our next guest, my dear soror, Reverend Laurene Williams. She is a soul activist, critic, social critic, and sports enthusiast, known for her ability to give voice to the deepest expressions of spirit and connect them to the daily experiences of living. Reverend Laurene Williams delights in creating spaces in which people can express love, experience connection, demonstrate responsibility, and empower community. She believes the ultimate purpose of ministry is to serve and empower consciousness as community, such that people experience their natural affinity and interconnectedness. Reverend Laurene asserts, the more we function from understanding the depth of our interrelatedness and degree of our interdependence, the more each of us can consciously create our lives and contribute to a world that serves us all. The church would expand beyond its walls as a house of God to God housed in us, and its congregation from a group of people assembled for worship to worship resembled in people. I like that. God, the nameless and named, is a lived experience and living presence. The spiritual experience of a multifaceted, multidimensional relationship to ourselves, one another, the more than human world and life itself, expressed and embodied as our divine essence. She is a sought after for her compelling conversations, engaging inquiry, sense of humor, and unique perspective on spiritually infused living. Reverend Laurene explores with people how to embody their personal truth in alignment with spiritual truth for greater fulfillment, power, joy, and peace of mind. This is accomplished through her writings, counseling, ministry, public speaking, transformational workshops, and innovative programs. Reverend Laurene Williams lives in Westbury, New York, as a caregiver to her mother, who is 86 years young. Let's welcome Reverend Laurene.
Well, hello, soror.
Hello, soror. We both belong to Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, so shout out to all of our sorors who might be tuning in. It's such a gift to be present with you. So how are you
Same here.
today?
I am arriving. It was very interesting. So I got up this morning. It's like, let me set up everything, and everything went well. And then in the last few minutes, it was just quite chaotic. And I thought, well, this shouldn't be, but that's one of the things that is part of my spiritual journey, is the receiving of what shows up as is and as belonging. And that is not always the easiest thing for me, especially if it's something that I don't want to be happening in that moment. Like right now, I don't have time for this. I went to go get my laptop and found the wire was wrapped around the leg of the chair. How that happened, beyond me. So here I am ready to tug my laptop and everything is falling. I was like, okay, isn't this lovely?
As we were speaking earlier, we were both reminded, because I was having some technical challenges on my end too, that spirit sometimes will invite us to know that we aren't as much control as we think that we are.
Not at all. The invitation to surrender. I don't think I really thought of it that way, but I can definitely see that when that happens, it can be an invitation for me to surrender,
Mhm.
get present, and just be.
Yeah, absolutely. When part of I like how you described yourself as a soul activist. What does that language mean in today's times? A soul activist. Why is that important?
It's so interesting. So, activism has always mattered to me. There was a stretch when I was, I think, in junior high, boarding on high school, where I was consumed, and I really do mean consumed by Dr. King and Malcolm X, like everything about them. And there were other, of course, people that were activists, but those two in particular. And as I, grew older and really thought about it, I thought, in the end, all of this activism is about the invitation and the kind of the demand that we live from our soul,
Mm,
that we live from that essence, that part of us that is love, that part of us that is oneness, that part of us that's a unique expression of the divine. And so for me, I feel like all the work that I do for activism is really about encouraging the presence of the soul. How do we live more from our soul? We're conditioned to live from expectations, from um, culture, from so many other places, but not always encouraged to live from our soul, which in some cases would mean giving up belonging, might mean, stepping out on the skinny branches by ourselves, feeling
mm,
like we're not supported, but because it's our soul, we're supported by the universe and, you
mm.
know, the God of our understanding. And so I think that's for me where soul activism, like DEI work, humanity work, social justice work, all of that to me is soul activism.
Hmm. You answered my next question by naming when it comes to being more attuned to living from the soul that it requires us to give up things. One of
Mm.
the things that you named is this sense of belonging. When it comes to spiritual curiosity, I know you've been on quite a journey in your own life, and I'm wondering in what ways have you had to release belonging to get in touch with your soul?
Well, one of the most recent incidents was being laid off from where I worked for. And I happen to be one of those people that is more consistent with our parents of having, worked for the same company for my entire career. So I was at an financial services asset management company for over 30
Mhm.
years and, moved around quite a bit in different roles and had just been promoted maybe like a year before and then was laid off with a number of colleagues who were of a certain age. And I remember that kind of release from belonging to the corporate role and belonging to the working world and, belonging to those of us who think that safety is defined in having a job or having a career. And I laughed when, to some degree, I laughed when it happened because I remember earlier that year, I had said to myself, oh, this is the last year I'm in this role. And it was only because I had been doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work off the side of my desk and wanted to do that full time. And I was like, it's time.
Mm.
And when it happened, that conversation I had with myself kind of flashed before my eyes. And I was like, oh,
Wow.
spirit, that wasn't exactly how I had planned for it to go. But okay, I can own this as my creation.
Mm.
But in the end, I also realized that I was really never supposed to work there.
Mm.
I followed that because that's what everyone did after high school. They found, they went to college and then they found some job of some kind that supposedly might be a career in something that you might enjoy. But I had always wanted to write. I had always wanted to, like, that was the thing that I wanted to do. And I never pursued it because I didn't trust that desire. Even though to some degree I knew that desire had been planted, by the divine, I still didn't trust that I could thrive and really succeed and live off of being a writer, because
Mm,
the cultural conversation, that's not what you do to make a living. That's a
mm,
hobby.
mm, And I think that is the question that so many people want to know when you go off to school, is how is this going to help you be profitable, and profitable in a way that we measure, as having money, as making
Yes.
making an income. And I really appreciate your transparency in this, because the last time I checked, I feel like at least 300,000 Black
Yes.
women from multiple sectors have been laid off. And
Yes. And much higher by at this point.
I
Yes.
believe that. I believe that, and contending with who am I without this position and without this title can be, excruciating,
Yes.
psychologically and spiritually. What have you leaned on during this time in terms of practice, spiritual practices, devotional practices, however you language them, to support yourself right now?
Definitely some journaling. I also have a daily call with a sister friend who she pulls oracle cards
Mm,
for me every day, and we sit down and kind of organize our day and serve as accountability partners. And then I'll read those oracle cards and really look for the messages and some guidance. I sit down, with my ancestors, not as consistently as I would like, nor they would like, but that is part of the practice as well. Um, I also will read. I have tons of books as resources, so a lot of times I will pick up a book, and in particular, there's a series called Letters from the Infinite. The first book is called The Sacred Yes. The second book is called Your Deepest Intent.
mm,
And are books revealed to Reverend Deborah L. Johnson. And those books are like, they're my go to.
mm.
It's one of those things that you can read from beginning to end, but it's not necessary. Let's say I'm grappling with something, and I'm like, all right, divine, speak to me. And I just open
Mm.
the book, and often it speaks to me. And then sometimes I'm like, that don't make no sense to me. What what does that mean? And then at some point I'm like, oh, I see. Because it's always what I need. And so I find that those are just a few of the things that anchor me. And being out in nature, like walking. I was in New Jersey when I got laid off. That's where I was living and working, and I moved to Long Island. And as I care for my mother, because at this point I was going to look for something else in New Jersey, but at her age, I was like, you need to
Mhm.
return home. But I'm still getting acclimated. So I don't really, like, I lived near a park that I could literally like fall out of bed into the park. And
Nice.
here I don't have that yet. And I mean, it's a nice neighborhood to walk in, but I really
Mm.
love walking in a park. So there's kind of finding those things, but it still doesn't. What I do have now is a backyard that I can sit out in that I
Oh,
didn't have. So that
yeah.
can serve its purpose as well, of being out in nature and allowing um, nature to talk to me and remind me of my own nature.
Mm. I really.
Because you get used to, sorry to interrupt, but
Mm,
I
fine.
can see I've gotten so used to the routine of our culture, working and doing this and doing that, being this human doing, and then being returned to, oh, human being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I appreciate your invitation to consider the outward nature as a reflection of our own nature in terms of a spiritual discipline of sorts. I'm also, thinking. I love that you mentioned multiple things too that keeps you grounded, and I think that level of diversity always helps with, renewing our exchange with the with
Yes.
the with the divinity within us and all around us. When it comes to this practice of oracle cards that you and this sister friend have, How, because some people will hear the title Reverend and have all of these assumptions about who you
Mm-hmm.
are and what that means. So how do you be who you be as Reverend Laurene and also use these oracle cards? What how did you get there?
It's so interesting. I never really knew anything about oracle cards. I hadn't really considered them. Then one of my friends, a different friend, had oracle cards. She had tons of them. And I was like, well, are these? She's like, oh, oracle cards. And so she was like my first introduction. And occasionally she would pull cards. And I would watch her, not just pull, but I would watch her sit and still. And first she would be in relationship with herself. And then she would look at me and be in relationship with me. And I found that experience to be this sacredness, like this, like her willingness to be a channel, but not so much a channel, so much as a conduit, a offering. Like, I'm going to do this for my friend. And often the card was applicable, like the information, and we would discuss it and look at how to apply it. And then I met this other girlfriend, and I think she could open a store with the amount of decks she has. And then I found different women, and I was really taken by one, the cards. Like, one of them is Goddesses of the World.
Mm,
And my tradition didn't speak about goddess. Everything was the masculine. There's another one that's I think it's Earth Warriors or something like that. And it's
I
like
love that.
indigenous in nature. I love that. And so there were these narrators of the divine that were consistent with the narrative I was given, but they were a different voice. But they were still a voice that to me held just as much significance, just as much wisdom. And so for me, it wasn't outside of being a reverend. It was just another anchoring, another pillar, if you will, to hold up the building.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Another pillar to hold up the building. I appreciate also that you are connected to a community of others who had these decks and that you trusted this community to lend the support through a tool or modality that they use. When it comes to you recognizing that there are some things in these decks that my tradition doesn't necessarily highlight or lift up. And I'm also open to what this particular tradition is saying. What is it about your spiritual journey, or where in your spiritual journey? And I'm interested because we haven't had this conversation before in terms of how you grew up
Mm.
spiritually and religiously, and your journey to being curious to get to the place that you get to be able to say, I'm not afraid to be present with somebody else's tradition or way of practice. How did that even start?
It's such a good question. Well, I grew up in Long Island. My mother is from Alabama, grew up in, I'll say Birmingham. The family's like all throughout Alabama, but most of the family in Birmingham. And my father is from Brooklyn. And so my
Mm,
mother has a tradition of being in the church. There are some family members that were pastors of churches, and she has a deep faith and tradition. And when she moved up here from Alabama, she stayed with friends of a family, and they went to an Episcopalian church. So she ended up going to an Episcopalian church because that was her community. That ended up being her community. And she still is a member of that
mm,
church, and that is the church, my home church. That is where I grew up. My father, came from a family like my grandmother went to church, but my father didn't necessarily attend church. He might come to church on the quote big holidays at the insistence of my mother, but overall he did not. I don't think that didn't mean he didn't believe in a God. I
mhm,
felt like for him, his God was family. Like that was the transcendent or bigger thing to live into. And over time, I just kind of followed what I inherited. But then I was always kind of curious because I would read or hear things and I was like, that just doesn't seem right to me. Like, but not like it doesn't seem right in my head, but like it doesn't seem right in my soul. That there were these conversations in scripture that were excluding human beings.
Mm.
And I was like, that seems inconsistent. You're telling me there's a God of all, but like to me, there's no, what, how is there a but? And so I just didn't quite understand it, but I was always curious. And then I was curious about people, you know, that the idea that we all came from one source and there was such difference. I mean, even within my family, there's such difference. Within my friends, there's difference. Even if all of us might be embodied, you know, might be brown bodied and black bodied, there still was all this difference of expression, of hair texture, of look. And I just was like, I want to know what's this thing that unites us all? Like, how is something, like, how magnificent that something could unite something so diverse, like all this diverse expression. So that just got me curious. And I remember writing like stories about angels and the divine and people and just curious. And I didn't remember that I had done that. I happened to years later find something and I was like, oh, I was writing about this. This is different. But over, I think when I got to college, I did a couple of religious studies classes and other things. So it was an interest that just kept kind of growing and building. And then I read, oh, so many things. I read Gary Zukav's Seed of the Soul and Iyanla Vanzant's Acts of Faith. And I can't even, there's a book that I consider it spiritual, even though it's, you know, Mutant Message Down Under. Like there were books that had these very unique and kind of spiritual elements. And I had a friend of mine that she and I were like book partners, and we would read all sorts of things that were different, if you will, expressions of the spirit. And that just kept building my curiosity. And then at some point, I was introduced to One Spirit. And that was funny because I wasn't interested, I was more interested in being a student than I was in being a minister. So I was like, oh, here's a place that's going to talk about the divine across different faiths and traditions. I was like, oh, okay. And then they were like, you're going to be a minister? I was like, not really, but because I do have a choice, right? Oh, okay. So yeah, so that's not what I'm here for. Thanks. Thank you for keep bringing up that conversation. But you can stop now because that's not my conversation. And then at some point, I was like, oh, I am at a seminary. And I knew that my bias, and I can own that, like my bias of what was limiting about ministers and what I did not like about the sense of someone being a mediary, like an intermediate between the human being and God instead of a partner. Like that was how ministers lived for me. I didn't always see much partnership. I saw more positionality. And so I was not interested in that. And so I kind of threw everything out and was like, well, I just want to be a student. But then when really faced with you're here at a seminary to be a minister, I knew I might not be able to be trusted about the choice I would make. So I went to my community because that's who I would serve. And I said, I'm in seminary. There's an opportunity, of course, to be a minister. What say you? And to my surprise, they all said, of course, you've always been like this to us. It's not been you don't walk around quoting scripture, but you'll say something that will remind you of a particular scripture, or you'll say something that connects me to my soul, or you'll say something that connects a situation to the divine and or spirit's invitation. And so it was interesting to have that conversation and have me return to me through their eyes and to see that this has always been a way of being, if you will, for
Mm-hmm.
me, like a commitment that I don't think I realized I had, but it's always been percolating in some way. And I think that ultimately the theme that runs through it, like that movie A River Runs Through It, is oneness. Oneness is like the thing that's my jam. Like I just love
Mm-hmm.
the not just the idea of it, but the inspiration of it, the instruction of it, like what it requires of you. If you actually believe in oneness in that moment of, I don't like you, what it requires of me, what it instructs me to do, and how it instructs me to be.
Mm. Whew. We could shut this down right there. What does the oneness instruct you to do when you don't like something or someone? And I'm thinking of particularly someone because we're living at a time when everybody pretty much has a platform to say what they believe, to share
Mm-hmm.
it. And of course, in the oneness, none of us are the same, right? So, how have you navigated what wholeness or what oneness rather is inviting you to when you don't like what someone has said or done?
It's been a struggle. I
Yeah.
will say that. And one of the things is to remember the validity of their expression, like it's valid. I once, in one of the books that I mentioned, it might be The Sacred Yes or Your Deepest Intent, there was this example of consider oneness as, if you will, like a bar,
Mm.
like when you're like the shower curtain
Mm-hmm.
bar, and then consider the rings people. So the people are all connected by this bar,
Mm.
but there are different expressions of consciousness along that bar. You've got love over here, you've got, if you will, a lack of love over here. Not necessarily hate, because if we really say oneness and love is all there is, then there's love and then there's just a lack of it. And it shows up as fear, it shows up as hate, it shows up
Mm.
as being unkind, it shows up as being violent, but it's just simply a lack of love. At no point are they not connected, because that bar runs through it. That bar of oneness runs through it. But at any given time, any of us can slide along the bar. Just like when you
Yeah,
slide the curtain, at any
absolutely.
given time, I can show a lack of love. At any given time, I can be unkind. And so the work for me is, how do I connect my humanity to that expression? I'm often reminded of the scripture that says, I am that I am. And I started to play with that. And I said, what if it wasn't I am that I am, but instead it was, I am that I am?
Yeah.
And to start to deal with, oh, I am that. Like, as much as I resist it, as much as I don't like it, I am that. And how can I find where I'm showing up? For example, a lot of people I know have problems with our current president. And I'm not saying that I do not,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't have it like it's just him. I've been interested in, well, how is my humanity like that? Where have I been self-serving? Where have I been narcissistic? Where have I been um, all about me, like self-centered?
Mm-hmm.
Because we all have those ways of being. And if I can start to look at where is that alive in my life and in my world, then in some way I'm countering that expression. I'm saying to the world, I'm saying to the environment, I'm saying, I am, I will not have that be alive.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
there's his work to do. I can have no say about that. But I do have a say about the relationship we have. And people want to sever the relationship that we have with the parts of humanity we don't like. And I know I have done that within my own self. It's much easier to do with people to kind of point the finger, but I always have to remember that in the pointing, that I need to make turn my finger around and be like, okay, that's fine. You pointed for that moment, but this is about you. It was once said, there is no one else out there.
Mm-hmm.
Like there isn't anyone else out there. There's just God. There's nothing else out there. And so if there's nothing else out there, then what there is for me to grapple with is, oh, if there's nothing else, then that's me. How can I grapple in a way that has me own and actually appreciate that that's me? Like, that's the hard part. Like, I can get all sorts of expressions are valid, but it's hard for me to appreciate certain expressions.
Oh yeah, that resonates with me quite a bit, and I think that is where the deeper work is often understanding how the things that we don't like, the things that activate us, are reflections of aspects of us that are difficult for us to sit with, because we are the both and of humanity. Like you
Mm-hmm.
said, I have at times been narcissistic, self-serving, and so how do I keep that at the forefront when I am being in attempting to be in relationship with someone whose viewpoints and ideologies are way beyond what I believe, which I definitely want to have those people on this platform as well, because it really is what it's about. This isn't just about the people that I agree with. It is also about the people that I don't quite see eye to eye with. And they happen to be in my family, they happen to be in my community. And so what does it mean to be in community and not be able to welcome the aspect that is activating? Um,
Indeed.
yeah, yeah. When it comes to this way that you describe God or describe this oneness as lived presence, has your concept of God changed throughout the years?
I would say it has. I don't think it's necessarily um, separated from oneness,
Mm,
but it has included more than I ever really thought. Like, for example, and I believe you know this, at one point, I dated an atheist. Now, that's not
yeah.
odd because I know at our seminary, we have people that are agnostics and atheists.
Mhm.
But he was certainly very unique, um, because we didn't share this background of one spirit. And so it certainly led to quite a few conversations and debates. And I started to look at, the God that holds him. Now,
Mm,
he's not going to say that God holds him, but I I feel like there's a source of the world that holds all of us.
mhm,
And I started to be interested in, how is he held? What does he hold on to? How does he make sense of being here in this world? And so there's always still this curiosity. So I think that for me, it maybe the ways in which my understanding of God have changed is just simply maybe the wonder has deepened
mm,
and the curiosity has expanded,
mhm,
and trying to some degree shed my conditioning of God as this thing and more about um, God as a theme almost.
mm. God as a
Like from
theme, Theme.
theme T yes,
Mm,
like a theme that runs through life like that. And so,
mm,
it's almost like, oh, like, look for the theme, because the theme is always there. It's in the birds, it's in the trees, it's in the wind, it's in people, it's in families, it's in sports, it's in, you know what I mean? Like, all of that. And I started to get, I remember once saying, oh, maybe the real world is the one that my family that has passed and become spirit. Maybe that's the actual world. And we're the ones that
mm,
aren't really in the real world. Like,
mm,
this is the thing on the side.
mm,
That
mm,
one, that world of oneness is really all that there is. And so that got me interested in, if oneness is all there is, then at any given time, my job is to reveal its presence. It's not something that we have to um, ascribe to. It's not something to work towards. It's
mm,
already here. There are just barriers to its existence. There's barriers to its experience. there's barriers to its embodiment. And to me, that allows for a lot less working. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot less, oh, I gotta work this oneness thing and do. It's like, oh no, let me just look and see what needs to get out the way. Kind of like how Michelangelo and David, he was like, oh, David's already in the marble. I just need to chisel what's not David. To me, it's no different for all of us. It's like, oh, just chisel away that which isn't oneness. And I'm not saying it's easy. You know, it takes some real chiseling. It takes some real chiseling.
It definitely takes some real chiseling. And I love the invitation you've extended to think about this world as not being the real world, but this world as an illusory world in a sense, in terms of the real world being the oneness that I believe we all come from and through.
Yes.
And from the spirit world, that dimension, and how we get an opportunity to be spirit beings who are curious about what it means to be human in this particular dimension, and what it means to be in this dimension and really do the work of chiseling to be in the fullness of our divinity, which is very, like you said, challenging. When it comes to your sacred text these days, what are the sacred texts that that inform you of the best ways, or not even best ways, but the ways to do that chiseling work?
And I still think it's, if I were to say, it really are those two books mainly, the Sacred Yes and Your Deepest Intent. And why that is because I find that both of those books will speak to spiritual principles, but from a different paradigm sometimes. And I find it very fascinating that, for example, I was thinking, I'm probably going to muffle the analogy, but there was this analogy about the elements that create fire, that there's oxygen, there's spark, and then, I can't even think what was the other thing. But in the end, like they're like, people are all people fall in some category. You need those that agitate. You need those that are oxygen, that breathe air into a space, and then you need whatever the other element that leaves me right now. But that all those expressions are required in order to spark life. And so when I thought about that, it's like there are all sorts of little metaphors and analogies like that throughout the books that have me grapple, but it has me grapple in a way that's less burdensome and more a joy. And I find that the books are, as I said, well, the books are letters from the infinite. And so they will start, Dear Reverend Daughter Deborah. And so I love the intimacy of a letter. I love the intimacy of a conversation. And to me, that's what that book is. But that's what all the sacred texts are. They're literally a conversation on paper of a particular perspective at any given time of the dance between the human being and this divine understanding. And so there are different books that I'll pick up. One of our books that we had was world religions, that I'll periodically pick that up just to be reminded of other expressions. But I don't really know if I have. Those are the only books. Often there might be an article or something that I'll read, or something that someone sends me. That's what I can't really think of any particular text, because I am someone who loves to read. And if someone says, like, for example, recently, a book called Held, I don't remember the detail of it, but was just sent to me as an ebook, and I'm looking forward to reading that. And I think from that book was the poem that someone shared, which was called blessings, but the line that stayed with me was to learn to bless myself like the earth blesses herself. Like the
Mm,
earth does not seek permission to bless herself, to grow, to be abundant, to be expansive, to be expressive. And I just love that imagery.
I love that imagery too.
The
I,
poetry is also, I will say, poetry is definitely one of my texts, if you will.
ah, okay, okay.
The
I,
writing of it and the reading of it.
I love that. When thank you for sharing those sacred texts over again. When it comes to your centeredness and oneness and appreciating the diversity that shows up in that oneness, do you label yourself within any particular tradition?
I would probably still say that I'm Christian. That is my background having grown up. I'm very curious about Christ's teachings more
Mm-hmm.
than I am Christianity because I think
Mm-hmm.
that there's been a gap between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I'm willing to still claim that I'm a Christian, but more often than not, how I say it is um, I am someone who is interested in Christ's teachings like
Mm-hmm.
that.
What is the delineate? I like that you're bringing up this delineation, and I'm wondering for you, what is it? What are the differences between Christ teachings and Christianity?
I think that Christianity has robbed Christ's message of its radicalness. That kind of the radical teachings of what does it really take to have belonging, to reach for those on the outskirts. So many of Christ's teachings are, the leper or the person that's, discarded, if you will, or dismissed from society. And, you know, Christ reaching and demonstrating what it is to be in partnership, to be in relationship. And that requires something. It's not easy to do. And I also think that the teachings of Christ are like an instruction manual to remind us of we too have those abilities and capacities. And I think Christianity has us operate like that's not our inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
Like being able to live like that, like, oh, that's so far beyond us.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, well, didn't Christ say, "Are ye not gods?" I'm like, did I miss something?
Look, I feel like that was in John 10, and he was referring to Psalm 82. There's a verse in there that's one of my favorite verses, Psalm 82:6. Are ye not gods?
Yeah,
Which people have a challenge referring to themselves as that. I have a challenge with referring to myself as
I
that.
do as well.
And at the same time, we are all made in the image and likeness of that energetic frequency. So
Exactly.
why wouldn't we believe that we are that? Yeah.
Exactly. And I think part of the challenge is the God we inherit seems so very distinct from the God of inheritance.
Mm.
The God we inherit has been used for violence, has been used for oppression, has been used for um, categorizing the value of human beings, separating. And so it's hard to want to be associated with God. And also,
Mm.
harshness and
Mm.
violence and judgment. And so I can find, oh, yeah, I would find that to be difficult to
Mm.
want to be. But also on the flip side, there's a magnificence and a wonder and
Mm.
a beauty that when I am not loving myself, I find hard to be with as well.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so there's just this invitation. I've been really interested in the word grapple. that that part of this journey, the spiritual journey, is the willingness to grapple.
Yes. And not
Just the
have to
willingness to
have
grapple.
the answer.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's
like
hard for a lot
it
of
really
people.
is. But when I think about for those that do sports maybe growing up when they're learning a sport, or for those that do art when they're learning or how to play an instrument, you grapple. And at some point you get in flow, and then other times you find there's another gap to learn. Like, let's say maybe I started the instrument and I'm in the last seat of the orchestra, and in order to get to the first seat, I got to grapple and learn and refine, and then I get there. But then there's more harder pieces of music to learn. So there's always this kind of ongoing unfolding that requires another level of grappling.
Yeah.
And to me, grappling is just more about, are you willing to play? Are you willing to play? And part of when you play, you don't need to know. What's there to know other than maybe the rules?
It's true. It's true. I'm going to sit with that invitation today and play more. I know I need to play more because there is a way in which that I like to be certain of things. And at the same time, over the past 6 years, there's been a lot of uncertainty globally, in my own personal life. And I think about the judgment that I've had for people who believe that I should be certain about a particular theological belief in order to be aligned with the God that they say that they believe in. And the older I get, the more that I release that judgment, because I want to be able to live in the grappling, even with this reflection of myself. Because I remember when I was someone who was very much centered in this certainty that it had to be this way, that you had to believe this thing in order to access whatever, whether that was heaven, whether that was belonging, whatever it was. And so
how did you find yourself releasing? Like, how did you release that, or how did it release you?
That's a great question. I think for me, it is a lifelong exercise. I can say that I get better in each moment, and it continues to be a muscle stretching. I think I don't like how I feel when I'm attempting to, because I used to deconstruct text before it was even language around deconstruction, and for me, doing that on social media, it became energetically burdensome for me. Having to prove that my way of being was the right way of being, or my way of thinking was the right way of thinking. When no, God is so much bigger than that. You can believe what you can believe, and I can believe what I can believe, and we're all still on that bar together.
Right.
That you mentioned earlier. Like, you may be at a part of your bar where I'm just not, and that's okay. And we get an opportunity to be in the exchange together. I think what's difficult for me now is when I meet someone who is very adamant that how they believe is what I should be believing too. And it always makes me reflect on, well, is there somebody in my life that I'm doing this to?
I can definitely understand that.
Yeah, asking myself those questions has allowed me to minimize my judgment of people, and I'm still working on it.
Same, especially when I find some of my expressions or things that I say and do, people feel are counter to being a reverend, and so when they find out, they'll say things, and I'm like, okay, that's your thing. That's your thing. I remember being with a girlfriend, and we were somewhere, and he was like, well, what kind of reverend are you? And I said, well, apparently one that you dismiss. And I was like, more power to you. That doesn't change who I am and what I stand for. And so, but what you won't do is disrespect me.
Yeah.
So you're entitled to whatever you think, but you've got one more thing to say, because you should recognize that this reverend is encased in all that is Black woman.
Yes.
You will catch all of what is Black woman. Okay. Okay. Don't get twisted. Don't get twisted. And I think that's a important, I play jokingly, but I think that's one of the things that's very important to me, is that so many times there's the box that ministers are put in. But what I think has makes a difference for people is one's humanity, one's self-expression. I remember saying to a friend once, I would be really interested in going into a church and um, hearing a pastor grapple at the front with something really difficult. For
Mm,
example, it was found out he had an affair. Deal with that live.
mm,
Like, deal with your humanity live, because there are people making choices. And although that would be so offended for some, because they want to be in a space that's kind of um, looks a particular way. But I find that over time, people want a practice of their spirituality, a practice of their religion that impacts how they live and makes a difference, that has them feel more themselves, that has them have more power, have more peace, have more fulfillment. And I think part of that is, are we willing to grapple? For example, I had done a sermon on grief, the holy invitation of grief, and it
mm,
was WHOLLY as well as holy, because I felt grief was one of those things that gives you an opportunity to really work on your wholeness, as well as that part of you that's divine and profound. Um, and in that sermon, I ended up having a conversation with someone who was part of that congregation before the sermon, and they were grappling with a past incident where they had been raped.
mm.
And unfortunately, I have that history as well. And I had worked through it, and I could hear the weight, like the weight of a past still alive. And I changed something in my sermon to just speak to, when there was sexual abuse in my life, that was my introduction to grief. And that was where I first learned to grapple with grief and grapple with this disconnect of the loss of my body, the loss of that relationship, the loss of my innocence, the loss of so many losses. And in the willingness to grapple with it, and I didn't go into it long, I just kind of weaved it in subtly, that there were quite a few people that we spoke afterwards, and they were like, you helped me go someplace that I didn't want to go but knew I needed to. And it ended up being such a rich conversation after the sermon. And I thought, that's what's important to me. I'm not saying that that's the way, but I just think that that's what people are asking. That I think that kind of movement from, oh, I'm spiritual and not religious, is more a request than it is a condemnation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I thank you for your transparency and vulnerability. It makes me want to sit with my own sexual trauma history in relationship to grief and grieving, because we often don't make a lot of room for that. And like you said, this very alive experience that had passed, that was still embedded in the body, and what it means to grapple with all of our humanity, not the parts that we like. And I think that sometimes when we think about, I grew up in the church, how performative it can be at times,
Mm-hmm.
when we're in a collective worship experience. I'm remembering how some preachers, when they get into the pulpit, like to pray for God to hide them behind the cross. Right? This notion of hiding parts of you in order to be acceptable to relay whatever message that God is speaking through you. And I believe that God wants it all.
Yes.
And it's hard for us to accept that God wants it all, because we don't want it all.
Joe
We
don't,
don't want
child.
to show it all. Because if I
Well,
show you all of me, then we have to really contend with, well, am I going to be accepted? Am I going to have a
yes.
space of belonging? And this journey can be difficult in terms of a journey of spiritual evolution because of so much that you lose along the way. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I know you talked about losing your job earlier and
Hmm.
being let off. How have you navigated some of these other losses in your life, and what have they taught you? If that makes sense.
No, it does. I think one of the biggest losses was the loss of my father when I was in college. And I never really dealt with that loss well. And I would still say there's still some work to do there. And later, the loss of my brother was a significant one.
Mm,
I was actually in one of the programs at One Spirit, the interspiritual counseling program,
mm,
when my brother passed away. And I was actually headed on a trip with some girlfriends when my mother called me and said that my brother had a seizure of some kind. And he was in the hospital for a couple of days, not long, like maybe 2 or 3 days. And somewhere in there, the seizure, he started to just have kind of repeated seizures, like almost die, be brought back to life, die, be brought back to life. And so there was the hospital asking who would make the decision, and I knew my mother couldn't. And so I did. And then there was the having his service, and my mother was going to ask one of her friends at the church to do it. And as they're talking about it, there's something like gnawing at me, like, this is not right. This is not right. I need to do it, but I wasn't sure if I could do it. I'd never done a funeral before. And all of a sudden, after my mother's talking to her, and I said, I'm sorry. She can't do it. It has to be me. And my mother was like, well, I wanted to be you, but I wasn't sure if you could do it. And I said, well, I'm not sure either. But we're about to find out. But I feel like that's what's right. Like there's something pulling me. And one of the things that I say had, but I don't mean it like a force, but one of the things I had to contend with was the relationship with my brother was not what I desired it to be. It
mm,
was often contentious, and we weren't as close as I would have liked. And part of that lack of closeness was certainly my judgment of him. My brother was someone who had never left home, he hadn't gone to school, like had all these judgments about who he was and what he should have been doing. I'm the big sister, and like I birthed him, like I'm his mama. I'm not, but older siblings act a fool. What can I say? And so, and so there was this relationship that I kept operating from. I'll have time, and then suddenly I didn't.
mm,
And so I used this opportunity to create a homegoing service for him, a celebration of life service, something I had never done, but I used it as the chance to work on and heal that relationship.
mm,
And so I grappled with it in front of my community. And I
mm,
actually said, I wasn't sure I could do this. And I also knew that I wasn't who I wanted to be for my brother. And it was time that rather than who I thought he was and judged him as, for me to go to the people that were his friends, the people that were his ace boom coons, and find out who my brother was, like the willingness to discover him beyond my
mm,
history with him. And then I put that discovery into words, that I discovered a man with a wicked sense of humor, someone who worked in retail, and I could judge that, but no, he was someone who could see what people needed and was able to give it to them before they even asked.
mm,
And what a tremendous gift that is, to be able to see people and want to make a difference for them. And so I married his loss also to all sorts of losses. Like we lose keys, we lose reputation, we lose jobs, we lose careers, we lose marriages. We lose so much.
Yeah.
Yet there is no real conversation about loss. Yet it is a constant companion of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so why not start to talk about it? Not just simply when there's the loss of life, but it's all like little messages of grief. But it's really not so much about the grief as it is, for me, it's like this invitation to live life more deeply and to live it more presently.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I had one of the things that I recognized was I talked about my brother never leaving home, but his staying home allowed me to travel and not have one concern for my mother's well-being.
Wow.
It had never occurred to me.
Wow.
Until I had to work through all of that stuff. And I called up a bunch of friends who I had been having those kind of conversations with, and they were saying the same about their siblings. I said, you go back and apologize. I can't anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You should go apologize and you should say thank you.
Wow. Wow.
And so the whole community just grappled with this. It was like, let's celebrate the grappling of life and the grappling with relationship and the grappling of love. Like it was just, and, my brother also, like I said, he had a wicked sense of humor. And so one of the things that I did was when I left here and I was still living in New Jersey at the time. I said, oh, let me go and work on the ceremony because there was so much activity here in Westbury. I was like, let me go to New Jersey. I need to get more clothes. And I was, sitting there, turned on the TV, like the radio station on TV. And I said to my brother, I need to work on music. And you have such eclectic taste. I'm just talking out loud. I was like, what kind of song should I play? And all of a sudden I hear a voice say Game of Thrones. Now, I did not watch Game of Thrones. My brother knew I would like Game of Thrones, but I was already had some other TV show, and I was like, I'm not going to be watching two at the same time. I'll get to Game of Thrones eventually. But I had the thought like Game of Thrones, and I'm like, well, where did that come from? And I was like, I'm not really sure where that's coming from. And so I said, hey, talk to me. Then I had the thought again, Game of Thrones. And I looked up I'm like in my living room by myself. I look up, I'm like, Game of Thrones? That don't make no sense. Are you crazy? Okay, fine. I typed Game of Thrones in my phone. Do you know what comes up is a song called Goodbye, Brother?
Wow.
And that song was, it was a cello, which I love, and it was deep, and it was one of those melodies that it would take you where it wanted you to go.
Mm.
And I used it for a meditation in the service where people could either read the obituary or people could grapple with losses, because there were quite a few people there supporting us that were still tender in their own losses, and giving them a chance to be with that or whatever, or to reflect on the relationship they had with him or the relationship that they had with their loved one. And, it was this real kind of moving, like in your body, like it was such an amazing song, and it was short. And at the end of the service, my cousin's wife, who I affectionately call Coleslaw, my cousin-in-law, I call her Coleslaw. She comes up and she goes, do you have any idea what that song is? And I said, no, I just know it's from Game of Thrones. She said, girl, that song is where they slaughter a whole village. I said, that boy, still messing with me. That boy, really? You gonna do that to me? Really? And we laughed so hard. Like, we laughed throughout that service. When I tell you we laughed in that service, we hooted and hollered a lot. Because it was important to have joy, because so many of our community brought us joy. We wanted to return to them what they gave us. And so part of the work of me doing that service was moving through their losses, my losses, the different losses, and returning it as almost like compost. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, repurposing it. Yeah.
It's like repurposing it and reminding us of this companion that we don't give attention to except when it's quote significant because it's a loss of life, but it's always significant. It's one of those companions that disrupts routine and reminds us of reverence.
Yes. 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 If we choose to live in that reverence.
Exactly.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing how you navigated the loss of both of your father and your brother, and I really appreciate this opportunity to know that the work of relationship doesn't have to just stop when the person transitions, but it can continue.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and we can still do the work necessary to fortify that connection if you are someone that believes in
Right.
the presence
Exactly.
of ancestry. And I also really appreciate you naming how loss is something that we companion with on a day-to-day basis. And that's something that I'm going to sit with beyond this conversation, and how we grapple with the challenge of the loss as well as the joy. It makes me think about my own father and how we still are in this dance, so to speak, where it is a challenging dance at times, just because I know we don't really know each other. Um, Even though my father has been in my life all of my life, he's a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful, beautiful man. At the same time, he's a man of a certain generation where they were taught that providing is what love looks like,
Yeah.
and that is that. And so, me moving out of my own ego to say I recognize this is his way of being, and how do I get a chance to invite myself to show up in ways that may be a bit uncomfortable. So I'm still wrestling with that, but you give me an invitation to look at it differently by looking for the things that can give me joy about his presence and his influence in my life, which I think is important because sometimes we do have to look for it. Um,
Yes, we definitely do. And reframing is always, I'd never really considered reframing, but my brother died at 46, which is pretty
oh,
young.
young.
And he had, he wasn't married, he didn't have kids. And often people are like, oh, that's such a shame, wasn't married and didn't have kids. And I looked and I was like, actually, he was married to his commitment to
Mm,
caring for people. And he may not have kids, but he was partner to so many of his female friends who had children, and he was like the beloved uncle. And so I really was like, he lived a full life. It wasn't, the markers that we've come to know aren't necessarily the only markers.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's
And
good.
starting to look for myself because I'm still very much wanting to subscribe sometimes to the markers. Like just being frank, I want to subscribe to the markers and like, oh yeah, but that's not really, as they say, sin is missing the mark. That
Mm,
sometimes those markers really are missing the mark.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's good. That's a good reminder. I know I didn't get to this in your bio, but I certainly want to mention it because you have been on quite just a journey in your life when it comes to being a graduate of Wharton Business School, in asset management. You're a member of Delta Sigma Theta. So you have this experience of sorority life as well as just your own career when doing transformational work in the DEI sector. How have these different spaces kind of shaped your spiritual lenses?
Mm. Um, well, all of a sudden there's a particular incident in work that came up that's so funny. I um, I was working in an area where my manager did not know much, and the person who was his boss was always, he knew a bit more, but he was always saying yes, like out to prove something, often at the expense of his staff. So often we as staff were complaining, like we are overworked, like the volume of work that we were doing, a lot of which wasn't even in our wheelhouse. Like he would say yes to things that weren't really consistent with the expertise in the group. And so we were in a meeting, and once again, he said yes to something. And I raised my hand and I said, currently, we just took on X, Y, and Z. And I said, and yet you've now added another thing for which that expertise does not lie here. I really invite you to reconsider saying yes to that. It doesn't really work. Now, everybody had been complaining about it, but I'm the one that put it into dialogue. Of course, no one else said anything. They just kind of left me there hanging, and we had a conversation. I could tell he didn't like it, but I felt it needed to be said. And after that, I got a review that you're ranked from 1 to 5. My review was a 2. And I knew it was retribution for that, retaliation for that. And I remember after meeting, so many people coming up, oh, blah, blah, blah. And I said, as much as I appreciate your willingness to have a conversation now, you're not having it when it would have made a difference. And I think that part of why that came to mind is part of the spiritual journey to me is the willingness to say the truth, even when it's inconvenient. And to be willing to own that there might be an impact to that truth, but that you're not alone because you're supported. Like, I was impacted by that, but I also knew, I don't know how this is going to go, but in the end, God, you're going to have me in this. And I remember really struggling in that group, like really feeling like my contributions were dismissed, and I was depressed and upset and getting angry and kind of carrying that home. And then one day I was sitting at home and I was like, girl, you sitting up here still mad and the day been over. I know they at home living their life. What is you doing? What are you doing? And I said, oh, then the scripture came, you don't work for man, you work for God. Oh, okay. I went back into work and I started being creative. I started offering and doing things that I knew they might not like, but I knew it would make a difference. I created checklists. I created procedures. I was having a ball. I started to engage at work in a way that honored who I am and honored whose I am. Do you know, a couple of days later, somebody just came and offered me a job. Just came and offered me a job. I hadn't applied for nothing. I knew I needed to at some point, but somebody came and was like, don't you have X, Y, and Z in your background? I certainly do. Well, we need you. Do you need to stay here? I certainly do not. And was gone.
I love it.
And the only reason why I think that story comes is because I feel like when you own who you are, whose you are, and there's this chance for trust, like the not knowing, the lack of uncertainty, but I don't know, but the how is not my job.
Yeah.
The how is the job of the universe and God. So the how is not my job. But we're really practiced at, like, we need to know how before we move. And it was like, no, I need to show up and I need to keep being who I am, whose I am, and trust. And then that's what happened. And so that was just one of several incidents in which I feel like the spiritual principles or beliefs kind of inform how I show up in those spaces. You know, in the chapter at Delta, I was in a couple of really great chapters, but I do remember one chapter having some real difficult time navigating it. And I watched a lot of people leave that chapter not wanting to deal. But I also believe that sometimes when you're in those places, that depending if you have the wherewithal, if you have the energy, if you have the commitment, that your presence can make a difference. Like when people are grappling and not and in this case, people weren't willing to grapple. That's really, people were just being positional and judging. And it was a really great chapter, and seeing it fall apart like that. The willingness to call people to the table and realize I don't have to have an office to do that. And people believe I need to have an office to do that, but I know I don't have to have an office to do that. I can remind us of what are the sisterly principles that we believe in. And even, part of, sometimes I think people come to sororities or fraternities thinking that the issues between men and the issues between women won't be there. It's like, no, it's there.
Right.
Fertile ground for it. But the idea is that you have some tools now. You have a brotherhood and a sisterhood through which to confront those things, in a way in which you go about it that honors your relationship, your kinship. And so I find that even then, there's still that kind of oneness to some degree, that kind of at all times reaching for a relationship. For me, I would say the biggest thing that informs how I marry spirituality to being in asset management, to being in a sorority, to doing DEI work is the Trinity. And I always had a problem with the Trinity. I was like, I don't get it. What's this? Father, Son, Holy. Like, I get it and I don't. But I started to really look at it, and I was like, oh, this is just about levels of relatedness and relationship. That there's this larger relationship, and I'll call it, let's call the Holy Spirit the environment that holds us all. And then there's this other relationship, Jesus. Oh, like that's me as a creator, that's you as a creator. Then there's, the Father. Oh, that's like universal law. Love, one, like that's, and it's just this kind of the dance of all these various relationships that are both hierarchical and they bottom up and they're linear and they're unfolding. And it's like this multifaceted relationship, so that at any given time, you have all these avenues with which to create life, in which to affirm life, in which to affirm your divine essence. And so that's the thing that I bring, I would say.
Wow. The relationality of the Trinity as representative of the larger reality. Thank you, teacher. You are one of my favorite teachers, and I really appreciate this notion that part of spiritual practice is to tell the truth. That resonates so deeply with me, and understanding that in truth telling, there will be some repercussions. There might be even be some reprimands that could impact your livelihood, even.
Yes.
And even in knowing that, would you still stay committed to telling the truth if it honors who you are and the God you say you belong to? Thank you for that.
And I had to confront. Yeah. It's so interesting what you say is that it may cost me my livelihood, but then what I have to confront, and still am confronting, is, oh, I have it like my livelihood is out there. And my livelihood is up there around, like it's God. And I don't, it's like I have to actually confront, do I really trust you, God, to provide? And sometimes, if I'm being truthful and vulnerable, I don't. I'm so practiced and conditioned to believe that livelihood is this thing through a job, through money. And it's like it takes something to keep returning to, like, how do I disrupt that conditioning that has become such a consciousness to like return to, children when they first come, they think they could be everything because they really know that, how I'm sustained is through this world of possibility.
Absolutely.
And, as we become adults, it then becomes a world of probability and us maneuvering through what's probable and trying to survive what's probable instead of thrive in what's possible.
Ooh. Oh, you dropping the gems. Thriving in what is possible. This is good. For those that might be feeling disconnected to themselves or from other people or even from spirit, where would you have them begin? Where would you tell them to begin?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think the best place to start is exactly right where they are, is exploring the disconnection. To just perhaps even write disconnection down on a piece of paper or draw what disconnection seems like, or throw on music that would speak to it and allow themselves to be in that space and allow something to be revealed. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I still struggle with being right where I am. The trauma that happened to me as a young girl, kind of out of my body, not wanting to be there. And so my thrown and default way is to not this, not here, not now. And so it really takes something to just, oh, this is where I am. And to know that where I am isn't outside of where I want to be. It's an access.
Mm.
It's a, like a, almost like a plot point. Like when you're drawing a map, it's just one of the plots on the map.
That's good. You heard it here. I am with Reverend Laurene Williams. Start right where you are. If you're someone that is feeling disconnected, because the disconnection is an access point to your greater way of being. Because that access point, and I believe you would agree, Rev Lorene, is where the living presence still is.
Exactly.
And where you are is where the living presence still is. So thank you all for staying tapped in, turned on, and tuned in to this conversation. If you found that this episode was supportive for you, please love, like, share, and subscribe. We're building something sacred together, and I look forward to being with you all next Wednesday. Peace and wholeness to you. Thank you so much, Rev Lorene.
And thank you so much for this privilege, this honor. Thank you all who listen, comment, who agree, who disagree, who grapple. Find me. Let's grapple together into greatness. Much love.